Hello, myself Sonal Ramakrishna here. Basically, we are discussing one of the topic that is city creation. In this, basically, one of the person told that if chief minister basically of India basically like that basically, then basically think of the other group basically, that is defense minister, railway minister, this minister, that minister, how they might be basically. Then one of the person told that yes, yeah, basically, they are basically very dangerous. That's why basically the police give the security to them basically. Otherwise, basically, why the security is required? Because if public basically is loving them basically, then why basically the security is required basically? That also basically is one question basically. Why basically security is required basically? Because their tasks are up to that level basically. 100 plane crashed, 200 plane crashed in Himalaya, in Mount Everest. So that type of task basically of chief minister basically are there basically. The past basically, because after getting chief minister basically they are not doing that type of task basically. So how basically task they might be doing in chief minister only basically? You can just imagine basically. The certificate of chief minister is 100 plane crash, 200 plane crash. So after getting chief minister basically, what would be that their task basically? You can just imagine. So it's very dangerous, very dangerous. So here basically we was talking about one story basically, that is conflict basically happened in the product creation of the banks also. That was New York Stock Exchange, sorry, New York World Trade Center basically, which was heated. There basically the products basically creation got affected. Due to that basically, here basically if you are doing the normal project now basically, the project manager keeps the buffer basically. But here the businessmen basically are doing their projects basically, and they basically are doing the project in live environment basically. That's why they keeps the control of news agencies also. And few businessmen basically purchase the news agencies only basically. They create their own news agency also. That type of people also basically are there basically. Because their tasks are up to that level, and that's why basically. They purchase only their news channel only basically. Because their tasks are up to that level basically. Their tasks are up to that level basically. So they have to purchase the news channel only basically. So that the thing was basically, the World Trade Center basically was not supposed to hit. That was one accident basically, which was by mistake happened basically. That was not supposed to happen in here basically. But that plane was going to crash, 98%. That was plane was going to crash basically, but in Mount Everest and Himalaya mountain basically. So this everything basically, one of the person told that basically, how many people basically might be knowing this basically? Because in corona basically, this was also verified basically, that how many people know that. Because when the corona basically was there, and when the whole world was basically shut down basically, that time basically also plane was running basically. And the question here was, that software basically which was tracking the information of the plane crash na basically, and the data science project basically which was connected with that project basically, that was the dummy data basically which was entered. That means data science project is very old project basically. Currently basically just basically came in 2005 2006 basically, but it was very old project basically. It was very old project. So they basically, what that basically, this thing basically we have already discussed basically, the each and every personal information of the each and every people. For example, I'm few people says that basically, Sunil, you are basically data science project basically has kept basically by some group basically. If you are going to plane in plane basically, when you are going to crash in Himalaya mountain basically, for that basically they have kept that basically. Just taking as an example basically. In really basically they are not keeping my information basically. If they are keeping, then basically keep basically what else basically. The one of the person to that, they are basically keeping the each and every people's basically personal information basically, so that basically when the plane will crash na basically, that time basically they can dump that data to the plane crash information project basically. So that basically live data basically is connected, they will get the information that the plane is basically moving in the that direction only basically, but it has changed into the Himalaya mountain and Mount Everest direction, and that basically hit it, and that basically something basically happened because there are more than 10,000 plane basically getting fly in the software basically. Big screen basically is there because you can't concentrate one or two plane basically. If one or two plane basically is getting missing basically, then basically nobody tracks. Why? Because tracking group basically are also connected with this basically. So that basically also nobody tracks basically. Nobody tracks this basically. So one of the person wrote that yes basically that is possible basically. So here basically thing was this basically was the task basically. In this task basically the businessman basically missed the task, and due to that basically lots of Indian businessmen basically came back to India basically because there was reason basically, that's why basically they came back to India. In this basically 2000 in 1918 basically whole world was basically shut down basically, but few software basically was still running basically, and they were verifying basically that how many people know this software basically, that plane is moving this side, and plane is basically hitting to the Himalaya and Mount Everest basically, because that time basically mostly basically if normal time basically the thousand plane are basically hitting them basically. So in corona time basically how many plane might have hit it basically, more than 1 lakh basically, I'm telling you, more than 1 lakh plane basically might have hit it. But who knows this na basically, that was the question basically. That's why basically the 11 parts basically has divided na basically. This is the reason basically. That means satellite group also basically knows that basically, that Asia country basically might get end one day basically. That is the India country because Himalaya basically is in India. That's why basically. If anybody public basically the other than in other than Asia country will know that basically in Himalaya basically thousand plane basically are getting crashed, then basically the world war will start basically with India basically. And mostly basically Indian army basically know that basically that this type of task basically is happening basically. That means just imagine basically if Indian army is ready, that means they know that basically this type of task basically is happening basically. That means that group know basically. Indian army knows that basically thousand plane basically are getting crashed in the Himalaya mountain. That means they know that this type of incident basically is happening. That's why basically they are ready now always. Otherwise basically what is the requirement basically of the ready basically always? There is no requirement because their tasks are up to that level basically. The Indian government basically are, sorry India can, because I am not supposed to say like this basically because I am in India basically, but there is no option basically by telling this all by not telling this whole thing basically. That is Indian basically Indian government and the India basically land and the Indian people basically task are up to that level basically, that Indian army is always supposed to be ready basically because anything basically can happen anytime na basically, because thousand plane basically is getting crashed. That is not a big amount, not a small amount basically. Few people says that 1 crore human clone created, 35 lakh human clone ended. Like this basically circle keeps on going basically because they are human clone na basically. They are created by the American people basically. American people only creates human clone and they only basically ends the human clone basically. So that is also basically converted into the human clone business basically. So here basically again back to that topic basically. Bollywood group basically. That is 2 crore people and they have basically spreaded their energy basically in across the world basically. So they basically say that basically we have successfully deployed our project basically in the environment basically. Nobody can basically, if basically whole if we, our one of the people basically is going to, somebody is basically going to create some problem to them basically, then see basically what we are going to do basically. So in next video basically we are going to see more about the Indian army, more about this 4 parts, and more about this future creation, and especially basically if this task basically does not happen basically, then how basically the Indian people basically came back to America basically.